Warning, this video contains spoilers for Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. God, that theme song just slaps so hard. After years and years of waiting, we finally have mutants in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, people. Now that Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness has officially cracked that door open, get ready to see a lot more of the X-Men coming down the line, as well as some of their most fearsome villains. There's a lot of X-Foes who have never really gotten the cinematic love they deserve, like Mr. Sinister, Cassandra Nova, and more. So join me as I take a closer look at 15 X-Men villains we could see in the MCU. Okay, yes, I will admit that we have had probably too much Magneto in the previous movies. But also, you just can't really do an X-Men story without him. The Master of Magnetism is one of Marvel Comics' most powerful and famous mutants, and his relationship with Charles Xavier is a key dynamic in the team's legacy. The past X-Men movies have really exhausted his sometimes good, sometimes bad character traits. Seriously, how many times did he team up with the X-Men only to betray them? So in order to keep things fresh, the MCU should explore different areas of the character, like his status as Scarlet Witch's father. Seeing father and daughter fighting either alongside each other or against each other would be worth the price of admission alone, especially after seeing Wanda go wild and unleash her powers in Multiverse of Madness.
It's probably just a case of the Mondays.
Mr. Sinister is by far the most important X-Men villain who hasn't appeared in a movie yet. Magneto and the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants basically hogged the screen for 14 years, and by the time Fox actually started getting ready to introduce their new big bad, the franchise was basically in the gutter. So I think that when the X-Men come to the MCU, Mr. Sinister should finally get the chance to show off what he can do. But what can he do? Well, he's a genetically altered human with a laundry list of powers, all of which he uses to wreak chaos on humankind and mutant kind alike. While he does have a few main goals, Mr. Sinister is mostly just evil for the sake of it. He'd take so much joy in just being a villain, if you couldn't tell from that cape. And he has an army of clones that can just take his place if he's defeated. For all these reasons, he would be a fantastic overarching villain for the X-Men to go up against in the MCU, and his theatricality would help him stand out from Thanos' giant purple shadow. While the previous X-Men movies did feature a ton of different mutants, a lot of them really didn't get enough character development and failed to live up to their comic counterparts. One of the biggest examples of this was Emma Frost in X-Men First Class, who went from a brilliant and power-hungry mastermind to someone who took off her clothes a lot. Now, don't get me wrong, I have no problem with attractive people taking off their clothes, but to reduce Emma Frost to just that is a disservice to her character. The MCU has a great opportunity to introduce Emma as an incredibly powerful female villain, which we haven't really had a ton of. Her telepathic powers would make her a formidable foe for Professor X, and her relationships with characters like Cyclops and Jean Grey are a goldmine for character drama.
So pathetic.
You know what the Marvel Cinematic Universe needs at this point? Another big bluish guy who wants to bend the universe to his will. That's an original idea, right?
I will bathe the starways in your blood.
Alright man, it was just a joke. Let's take it easy here. Apocalypse is one of the world's oldest mutants, and he's an extreme believer in survival of the fittest. He seeks to orchestrate a massive war between humans and mutants, with only the strongest and most vicious left alive. He was previously portrayed on the big screen by Oscar Isaac, who tried his best but ultimately couldn't prevent the character from being pretty lame. Apocalypse deserves another shot in the MCU, and might I even suggest that he could be a good foe for the Eternals? After all, he's been around pretty much as long as they have, so the chances are solid that they would have crossed paths at some point. Or, given their shared connections to ancient Egypt, maybe he could fight Moon Knight and they could do the Spider-Man pointing meme. Similarly to Emma Frost, Lady Deathstrike is another significant female villain who just didn't get enough screen time in previous X-Men movies. Her father was actually the one who created the Weapon X process that Logan went through, and she ended up going through it herself. With adamantium claws now protruding from her nails, Lady Deathstrike set out to hunt down Wolverine and prove herself to be the superior fighter. Obviously, she would be best suited for an X-Men movie, but I also think that she could fit well in a sequel to Shang-Chi. After all, she's one of the Marvel Universe's best fighters, she's battled Shang-Chi in the past, and the Ten Rings have shown no hesitation in hiring enhanced assassins. It would be a nice way to organically tie her, and by extension other mutants, into the MCU as it currently stands, and she could be instrumental in gradually introducing the concept of mutants on a large scale. On the other hand, we have Mystique, who definitely appeared too much in the past. She was good in the original X-Men movies, Rebecca Romijn is great, of course. But once Jennifer Lawrence started to play her, things got out of hand. Why did she join the X-Men? Whatever. The point is that she's a really important character, and she's still got quite a bit of ground the MCU could cover. It would be cool to see them lean more into the espionage angle of her shape-shifting abilities, as well as the fact that she's Nightcrawler's mother, something that was only hinted at in the Fox movies. And she's Rogue's adopted mother as well. Man, so many of these characters have weird issues with parenthood. I wonder if the comic book writers were trying to tell us something.
I'm the Juggernaut!
Possibly the most meme-tastic X-villain of all time, the Juggernaut is a must-have for an MCU X-Men adaptation. In the comics, his real name is Cain Marko, and he's the stepbrother of Charles Xavier. After discovering a mystical artifact called the Crimson Gem of Sidorak, Marko gained incredible superhuman abilities and decided to take down his hated stepbrother and his students. However, he's also had some major encounters with other superheroes, like Spider-Man, who once sunk him into wet concrete. While Juggernaut has made some memorable appearances in previous X-Men movies, none of them have explored his relationship with Charles, instead opting to portray him as a fairly dumb bruiser. Juggy's obsession with his stepbrother would add an extra layer of terror to his character, and he would pose a great physical threat to Charles' mental abilities.
I'm the Juggernaut!
Yes, we know. The Purifiers are a dangerous organization of religious zealots who believe that God wants them to purge mutants from the earth. They're led by Reverend William Stryker, who is reimagined as a high-ranking military officer in previous X-Men movies. Because of this change to his origins, his followers didn't end up making it onto the big screen. Instead, we just got some generic military guys. But now that we're starting fresh in the MCU, I think that the group would make for great human villains for our heroes. The existence of the Purifiers shows just how much some humans distrust and fear mutant kind, symbolizing the seemingly insurmountable obstacles that they'll have to overcome in order to make a fair name for themselves. The X-Men managing to defeat the Purifiers and showing the world that they truly are heroes would be an incredibly inspiring moment that would help to put the team on the map in a big way. Every movie needs more dinosaurs, that's just a fact. It feels especially appropriate for the X-Men, considering the fact that one of their villains, Sauron, is literally a giant dinosaur man. He was originally a doctor named Carl Lycos, who discovered the prehistoric Savage Land and was bitten by a mutated pteranodon as a child. Normally, this would give you a terrible infection and you'd probably undergo a very painful death. But, you know, because this is comic books, he instead turned into a giant flying monster. More than anything, Sauron is a super fun villain.
You can rewrite DNA on the fly and you're using it to turn people into dinosaurs? But with tech like that, you could cure cancer.
But I don't want to cure cancer! I want to turn people into dinosaurs!
Aside from the fact that I would absolutely love to see some dinos in the MCU, Sauron's introduction could allow Marvel Studios to sneakily introduce the Savage Land, a whole new world with a lot of potential for some really fun stories. We could see the X-Men team up with characters like Khazar and Shauna to take on the monstrous villain, and we could even meet some other crazy Savage Land characters like Gog. Or maybe we could see him take on Shang-Chi. After all, we all know Sauron can't resist those rings of power. Huh? Aside from being a funny thing to call people you don't like, Nimrod is also the name of an incredibly powerful sentinel from the future. After being sent backwards in time, the robot made it his goal to take down all mutants. Over the years, he's proven himself to be incredibly dangerous, even by Sentinel standards, especially when he's corrupted by outside foes like William Stryker and the Purifiers. The Sentinels appeared in a major role in X-Men Days of Future Past, and I don't really want to retread too far on something that viewers are already familiar with, but I think Nimrod stands out among his fellow robots. The fact that he comes from the future means that he's far more powerful and upgraded than the other Sentinels, and this backstory could be tied into the Avengers' excessive time traveling in Endgame. Maybe Nimrod got sucked back in time as an after effect of that film's events, similarly to how the multiverse of villains made their way to our world in Spider-Man No Way Home. Nimrod's not a complex enough character to be the main antagonist of whatever movie he appears in, but his presence would definitely allow for some very cool and high-stakes action scenes where the X-Men are truly in danger. Cassandra Nova is the evil twin sister of Charles Xavier. That's right, not only does this guy have the Juggernaut as his stepbrother, he's also got an evil psychic sister who's actually an astral parasite.
This is starting to sound like a bad comic book plot.
Yeah, so basically Cassandra Nova is the evil version of Professor X. She possesses all his powers, plus the ability to forcibly switch bodies with people. She's previously used that power to take over the bodies of both Charles and Emma Frost, who are two of the Marvel Universe's most powerful psychics, so you know that she's someone not to be taken lightly. And, accordingly, she'd be a whole new level of villain for the MCU. You know what, I'm just gonna throw out an idea that you guys will probably hate, but I think it would be cool. What if we have, you know, a normal X-Men adventure where they fight the Hellfire Club or whatever, and then in the post-credit scene, it turns out Cassandra Nova's been in control of Professor X the whole time. That would be a shocking moment that would completely change the trajectory of the X-Men's journey. Trajectory. Why is that such a hard word to say? Trajectory. And it would provide them with an incredibly personal foe to go up against. Then they could defeat her in a sequel and get the real Xavier back for that classic X-Men dynamic we're all used to. We've been introduced to both the Skrulls and the Kree in the MCU, but there's still one major empire we haven't met. Though, to be fair, it's because their rights have been owned by Fox up until now. The Shi'ar Empire is the third big intergalactic empire of the Marvel Universe, and like the others, their main goal is continued expansion. The Shi'ar won't stop until they rule every planet, and they even have an elite team of warriors called the Imperial Guard, who are suspiciously similar to a certain other superhero group from a certain other comics company. The Shi'ar are led by their empress, Lilandra, who's had a complicated romantic history with Professor X. If Marvel Studios opts to introduce the Empire, I think they should lean into her and Professor X's romance. Their intergalactic love story isn't one we've ever really seen the likes of in the MCU, and the Shi'ar could start off as foes to the X-Men before eventually ending up as their allies. They were also heavily involved in the original Dark Phoenix saga, but I think the opportunity to use that story in a movie has officially been, well, squandered. Twice. The Marvel Universe has a ton of dangerous villains, but Omega Red just might be one of the most bloodthirsty of them all. He's a vicious mutant with the power to emit lethal spores from his body, as well as tentacles in his arms that are made out of carbonadium, basically a worse version of adamantium. He initially started out as an operative of the USSR, but he eventually became a free agent, establishing himself as a major figure in the Russian underworld and a deadly foe to the X-Men. Now, Black Widow showed us that the USSR had been up to some secretive experiments, like trying to create their own super soldiers. If Omega Red shows up in the MCU, it would make a lot of sense to tie his origin into those same experiments. His admittedly absurd powers would probably have to be toned down a little bit, maybe ixnay on the death pheromones, but the carbonadium implants are really cool and freaky and could lend the film to some fun Dr. Octopus type action scenes. It would be really interesting to see him and Red Guardian meet each other and potentially fight, although I don't really know how well Alexei would do in this situation. Sorry, King. The Avengers previously dealt with Hydra and their leader, Baron Wolfgang von Strucker, in Avengers Age of Ultron. Strucker is yet another incredibly important Marvel villain who met a demise that, in my opinion, was incredibly premature and kinda lame. Seems like Marvel Studios kind of wanted to get rid of Hydra on the big screen, so they just had Ultron take him out real quick, just like that, and that's too bad. But there's still an opportunity to explore the life and legacy of Baron Strucker, and that's through his kids, Andreas and Andrea von Strucker. The two are twins, and their father experimented on them before they were even born to give them superpowers. After growing up, they became a supervillain duo called Fenris, and engaged in several nefarious schemes, most of which were opposed by the X-Men. They've worked both with and against their father over the years, and they could really go either way in the MCU. If Marvel changes their mind and ends up wanting to bring Hydra back, it'd be cool to use the Struckers to allow the group to cross paths with the X-Men, because that's not a dynamic that's ever been possible to see until now. Andreas also joined the Thunderbolts and took up the identity of the Swordsman for a while, so he could serve as the MCU's version of that character after the Hawkeye series faked us out with Jack Duquesne. Plus, if the secret group that Valentina Allegra de Fontaine is building ends up being the Thunderbolts, Andreas is another morally questionable figure who could help fill the ranks. Yes, everyone's favorite merc with a mouth, Deadpool, actually started as a straight-up supervillain when he was first introduced back in 1991. Of course, he's proven to be an incredibly popular character, so over the years he's become more of a lovable rogue type. Not that kind of rogue type. so that he's more palatable for audiences. I mean, his movies still have R ratings, he's definitely still doing horrible, gross things, but he's had the edges sanded off a bit so that he can be a big mainstream success. Now, according to Kevin Feige and Ryan Reynolds, Deadpool will make the jump over to the MCU, and his movies will apparently keep their R rating, which is interesting. It seems like making R-rated movies is something Disney would be hesitant to do, especially in this day and age. But then again, Deadpool 1 and 2 made an absurd amount of money, so that's probably a risk they're willing to take. Plus, Ryan Reynolds seems to genuinely love the character of Deadpool, and he's clearly put in a lot of care and effort to the character's solo movies. So I trust that he'll help to shepherd the Merc with a Mouth along to the MCU. But now the big question is, who will Deadpool fight? Well, if I can give my 2 cents, and I can, because I'm the host, I think that they should just go for it and make Deadpool 3 an adaptation of Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe. It's a story in which, well, the title really says it all. He sets out to take down every major character in the Marvel Universe, and he does a pretty good job of it. Starting off Wade Wilson's tenure in the MCU with a story as irreverent and violent as this would do a lot to soothe fan concerns about his transition from the Fox universe. Plus, now they have all these iconic characters that Deadpool can interact with. Obviously, I don't want him to actually massacre our entire lead MCU cast, but in an infinite multiverse, there's any number of different strange universes he could wreak havoc on.
Maximum effort.
What's up everybody, I'm Matt Sonnack, I made this video, and I am eternally grateful to you for watching it. Let me know in the comments which X-Men villains you'd like to see in the MCU, and make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you next time.